A suspect in the deadly Fayetteville shooting on New Year's Day
found stabbed to death inside their Arkadelphia home.
A Little Rock mother is pleading for help tonight. She is asking anyone to come forward that may know what happened the night her son was murdered.
One piece of smart technology could help solve a murder mystery in Arkansas.
Joining us from Little Rock.
You're listening to Strictly Homicide, an Arkansas true crime podcast discussing lesser-known cases out of the natural state. I'm your host, Nicki T, and before we get to the case, I want to give my shout-outs. First off, thank you for downloading episode 9. I can't believe our next episode is the big 1-0. I want to give an extra special thank you to our newest patrons, Jen D., the lovely ladies over at the podcast Moms and Murder, one of my favorite podcasts, so make sure you subscribe, and Stacy P., which happens to be my best friend. Thanks, y'all. For more information, visit our Patreon page by searching for Strictly Homicide. Another huge thank you to all of the listeners who not only subscribed to the show, but rated and reviewed the show on iTunes. I want to read a review that we received from Melissa G54. She said, I love this podcast. I heard about the show in a true crime Facebook group, and I was drawn in. The way the host tells the stories is respectful and keeps you on the edge of your seat. It's all cases I've never heard of, and the length is perfect. The research is amazing. Thank you. Your reviews really help get this independent podcast out there, and I appreciate every bit of feedback I get. So if you enjoy the show, please make sure to head over to iTunes, subscribe, rate, and review Strictly Homicide. You can find us on all major podcast apps, including iTunes, Podbean, and Stitcher. We also are now on Spotify. You can find links to all of our social media on our website, strictlyhomicide.com. Make sure to stick around after the show to hear some promos from some of my favorite podcasts. I thought I'd give you a little bit of humor before we get into the case. If you're a Little Rock resident, make sure that your dog doesn't bark after 6 p.m. because it's not permitted. That isn't the only weird noise law in Little Rock. If you're at a place that serves cold drinks after 9 p.m., whatever you do, do not honk your horn. While out walking your elephant, if you decide to tie it up on a parking meter, you better put change in the meter or you'll be fined. Elephants have to pay for their spots just like a car. If you think wearing a fake mustache will cause any unseemly laughter, don't wear it to church because it's against the law. Starting this month, I'll be covering some of Arkansas's mysteries. Arkansas has so many old mysteries, I decided to start making mini episodes for Patreon supporters as a reward. These mini-sodes will be available for pledges of $5 or more. The first episode will be on the Gurdon lights that have been seen and even studied by scientists since 1930. When I found this case, I didn't realize how crazy it was. The more I researched the case, the more I found out that Chevie Kehoe has a huge background, and none of it was good. Episode 9 is the case of Chevie Kehoe, a self-proclaimed white supremacist that was raised with such extreme anti-government beliefs that he planned to form his own all-white militia to take down the U.S. government.
Kirby's molding of his oldest son's Chevy as a leader of the next generation of white warriors reached a new stage. The Kehoe family had stockpiled an arsenal, used aliases, and hid out from the government.
Warning: Strictly Homicide covers cases that involve sexual assault, violence, and homicide. Episodes may contain explicit language and are not suitable for young ears. Listener discretion is advised. In 1973, Kirby and Gloria Kehoe welcomed their first child. Kirby was obsessed with Chevrolets and decided to name him Chevy, with an IE. Kirby was a Vietnam vet with extreme anti-government and white supremacist beliefs. Kirby had a hard time keeping a job because he didn't like being told what to do, so he moved his family around all the time. In 1985, they moved to a cabin on 20 acres near Deep Lake in Stevens County in Washington State, near the Idaho border. Kirby did not like outsiders, so they rarely had visitors. Chevie became childhood friends with a boy his age that lived down the road, named Israel Keys. Their families were both raising them with the same anti-government and white supremacist belief. Israel Keys was an American serial killer. Chevie attended Colville Junior High in 1987. His teachers actually had great things to say about him as a younger teen. They remembered him as a nice boy who was on the honor roll. He wanted to run track, but his parents wouldn't allow it. His parents hated the public school system and thought of it as a threat. So in 1988, Chevie's parents decided to remove him and his brother Shane from the public school system and homeschool them. Kirby was afraid that others would teach their boys bad habits in the public school systems. So by homeschooling him, he would avoid that. Chevie remembers his mother not being a very good teacher. He said they were pretty much self-taught, and by 15, he told himself that his life was useless. Both the Kehoes and the Keys attended the Ark, a Christian identity church whose pastor preached that the white people were the chosen superior race. Christian identity is the white supremacist, racist interpretation of Christianity. The extremely conservative Christian churches, extreme right-wing political groups, and survival groups. They believe that all non-white individuals will be exterminated or enslaved so that the white race is the only race in the heavenly kingdom. Although it is in the name, the movement has a hostile relationship with fundamental Christians due to their beliefs that the return of the Jews to Israel is essential for the second coming. Christian identity believes that the second coming and Armageddon involve a race war exterminating or enslaving non-whites. They endorse physical violence against mixed races, homosexuals, and Jews, all which they believe are forces of evil. They believe that mixed races are unclean rodents and are the causes of diseases, addictions, cancer, and sexually transmitted diseases. Christian identity beliefs were developed by two authors who claimed Europeans are the chosen people and the Jews as a cursed offspring of Cain. White supremacist groups and gangs began adopting these beliefs. Christian identity emerged in the 1920s, teaching that the Jews are not descendants from the tribe of Judah, but from Satan instead. Howard Rand, a lawyer from Massachusetts, was raised as a British Israelite. He began claiming that Jews made up a minority of the tribes of Israel and were not descended from the tribe of Judah. Because he lacked anti-Semitic views, they considered him a transitional figure, although he was the first to coin the term Christian identity. By the 1930s, the beliefs shifted to believing Jews were descendants of Satan and began demonizing them as they did non-white races. During this time, links began emerging between Christian identity and the KKK. Wesley Swift moved to Los Angeles in 1946 and founded his own Christian identity church in Lancaster. Wesley has been identified by the FBI as the single most significant figure in the early years of the Christian identity movement. By 1950, he was the West Coast representative of the Christian Nationalist Crusade. He also began hosting a daily radio broadcast proclaiming the ideology to the large audience. His message began to spread rapidly, which led to the creation of similar churches throughout the U.S. In 1957, the name was changed to the Church of Jesus Christ Christians, which is still used today by the Aryan Nation. Christian identity churches all teach a similar message, but the level of support for violence changes by church. They do all agree that the Aryans are God's chosen race. Racialism is the core belief of Christian identity, and the majority of its members are white nationalists who support racial segregation. They adhere to the general rules of Christian identity, including the roles of women, abortion, homosexuality, and mixing races. Going against the rules are a sin and a violation of God's law. When Swift died, the church was taken over by Richard Butler. He never spoke of Swift, and eventually he caused the attendance to decrease drastically. Eventually, he moved the church to Hayden Lake, Idaho. Christian identity rose in the 1980s, but aggressive efforts by law enforcement and loss of influential leaders brought on the present decline. Chevie had to fight his parents to gain a Social Security number and driver's license, and at 17, he was hours away from joining the Navy. Chevie ended up marrying his neighbor, Karina Gum, and they had a daughter a year later. He met Jake Settles at an Aryan Nations compost in Idaho and quickly became close to him. He looked up to him like a father as he drifted apart from Kirby. Chevie began studying the ideas of Robert Matthew. Robert formed the Order, an underground terrorist group. Chevie respected him for his dedication and agreed with his concept of separation. Chevie developed a plan to create a whites-only nation called the Aryan People's Republic. In 1991, a neighbor's house was raided by the feds, which angered Chevie and added to his anti-government beliefs. Not long after, Robert Weaver would have a standoff between authorities in Ruby Ridge, Idaho, and Chevie's hatred of government grew. Chevie began embarking upon a series of crimes, including property and firearm thefts, and attended rallies with his brother Shane and childhood friend Israel. In 1993, Jake Settles introduced him to his sister-in-law Angie. He convinced her to join him and Karina in a polygamous marriage. And on July 9, 1993, Chevie and Angie wed, not legally. Chevie took both wives with him to an annual event, Aryan World Congress, in 1993. He was hoping that it would impress important members, explaining polygamous ways ensured the vitality of the white race. Karina was having a hard time accepting his polygamous ways and would cry a lot, which pissed Chevie off. Chevie would beat her often, and she was afraid of him. Angie reported that at the event they attended, Karina suffered a black eye and bloody lip. Angie said they traveled a lot during their short marriage, and they spent some time in Elohim City, Oklahoma. In 1973, Robert Mueller, a Canadian immigrant and important leader in the Christian identity, founded Elohim City, a private community in Adair County, Oklahoma. The 400-acre rural community gained national attention for its ties to members of the Order, Timothy McVeigh, and Richard Snell, who will be covered in a future episode of Strictly Homicide. It wasn't Chevie's first time at Elohim City, so he knew most of the residents. During an interview, Angie said she had never been in the presence of so many weapons. There were guns everywhere, and they all lived as survivalists. When Karina went into labor early, the nurse told Chevie that Karina and the baby were in stress and she needed to be taken into a hospital. Chevie did not like the fact that this woman was telling him what to do, so he told her to leave and decided to go get his mother. Gloria arrived to take care of Karina and the baby instead of the nurse. Angie was just miserable there in Elohim City. She realized she got herself into a bad situation and was in fear of her life. Angie wasn't allowed to speak with her parents, and she had no one to help her escape. She told Chevie she wanted to go back home to her parents' house. Chevie told her he would not allow it. But when Gloria arrived to help deliver the baby, Chevie expressed to his mother that Angie was wanting out of the polygamous marriage. Gloria never agreed with the lifestyle and encouraged him to allow Angie to return home to her family. He listened to his mother, and Angie did return home to Washington. That whole polygamous relationship lasted only 54 days. While Chevie was a resident at Elohim City, he met up with a group of individuals that were members of the Aryan Republican Army. He began supplying them with stolen firearms that would later be used in a series of 22 bank robberies in the Midwest. This is also when Chevie met Daniel Lee and Fallon Lovelace. Lee and Lovelace were just like Chevie, a long history of crime. Lee and Lovelace became part of Chevie's group, Aryan People's Republic. Soon they were all involved in many criminal activities that promoted and funded the group. Chevie was set on growing this into a white-only union. Kirby and Gloria were now residing in Kingston, Arkansas. They became friends with William and Nancy Mueller, a couple they met through the gun show. The Muellers lived in Tilly, Arkansas, and shared the same Christian identity and anti-government views as the Kehoes. William was a successful electrician and had a steady contract with Walmart. William and Nancy met in 1989 when he offered Nancy, who was half his age, to work for him as an apprentice. Not long after she accepted the position, William proposed marriage to her. Nancy's parents were not happy at all. They did not agree with his views and way of life. He also made a large income from gun shows. He sold guns, survival gear, anti-government videos, and copies of an anti-government newsletter called The Patriot Report. Kirby and Gloria befriended the couple at a local gun show and ended up spending a lot of time with each other. The Mueller family was pretty well off, complete opposite of the Kehoes, who have spent most of their life in poverty. Friendship meant nothing to Kirby Kehoe. When an opportunity arises, Kirby takes that opportunity. In January of 1995, Kirby and his son Chevie broke into his friend's home. They stole guns, ammo, and other survival gear from Mr. Mueller in a total loss of over $50,000. William went to the police and reported the theft. He told law enforcement that he felt like it was someone local who robbed him. The police attempted to interview William multiple times, but each time William canceled. Later that month, Chevie would head to Elohim City, stopping in Harrison, Arkansas to steal a 28-foot travel trailer. Chevie showed up at Elohim City along with the trailer full of guns, most of them being William Mueller's. He met up with Fallon Lovelace to take the guns to Washington and store them in a garage at the Shadows Hotel and RV Park. The Shadows Hotel was known to be the home of underground trades involving guns, ammos, and bombs. They would end up staying in a room that was across from Timothy McVeigh, who was there for a local gun show also. McVeigh was often seen speaking with Chevie or hanging out in one of their hotel rooms. There are rumors that Chevie knew about the Oklahoma City bombing before it happened. A hotel worker claimed he ran into the lobby yelling to turn on the TV to CNN something crazy was about to happen. That June, Kirby came to Washington to drive Chevie and Fallon to kidnap a couple. Malcolm and Jill Friedman were a Jewish couple that owned a grocery store. At one point, Chevie worked for the Friedmans in their store. The three men drove to the Friedmans and kidnapped them, demanding money. They were able to steal around $15,000 from the Friedmans before letting them go near the Shadows Hotel and RV Park. Kirby, Chevie, and Lovelace split the money between them. Chevie and Lovelace purchased property in Idaho with their portion of the money. Since Angie left Chevie and Karina, he was eager to bring another woman into the marriage. Chevie had his eye on a woman who was already married, but this didn't matter to him. Jeremy Scott was the husband of the lady that Chevie had his eye on. Jeremy was standing in the way of the relationship Chevie wanted. So Chevie convinced Lovelace to murder Jeremy Scott because he was part of the Aryan People's Republic. That September, the crime sprees didn't slow down one bit. Lovelace robbed a jeweler and gun lover, Dick Morton. He kidnapped him and drove him to an ATM in Spokane. After Dick withdrew money, Lovelace dropped him off at the Shadows Hotel and RV Park. Chevie and Kirby would continue to travel to gun shows while pulling off robberies all over the U.S. They would take guns, ammo, and money and live off the money that they would receive from the sales of the stolen items. In January 1996, Chevie and Daniel Lee headed to Arkansas to pull off another robbery. On January 11, 1996, the Mueller family was visiting their friend Dr. Charles Turner at his home in Hector, Arkansas. It was icy outside, and Dr. Turner tried to talk William and Nancy into staying there until the road conditions improved. They declined, bundled up their 8-year-old daughter Sarah, and headed home. This would be the last time anyone would see William, Nancy, and Sarah alive. Chevie and his accomplice, Daniel Lee, entered the Mueller property dressed as FBI agents. The men were able to overpower William and Nancy and knock them out. They then asked Sarah, Nancy's 8-year-old daughter, about the location of William's money. It is said that they tortured her with electric cattle prods until she gave them the information. Chevie and Daniel gathered the money and gold and loaded the items into the Mueller's trailer, also full of firearms, ammunition, and militia supplies. They then headed inside and placed plastic bags over the heads of each family member and affixed the bags to their bodies with duct tape. They weighed the bodies down with rocks and threw them into the Illinois Bayou. They joked that the Mueller family was now on a liquid diet. Chevie and Lee headed to Washington, where they were taking the stolen items. They arrived in Washington on January 14, 1996, and headed to the Shadows Hotel and RV Park to store the items. Throughout the next few months, Chevie was all over the country participating in illegal activities to live off of and fund his Aryan group. He traveled to Montana with Chevie Kehoe to see their parents, and then they headed to Arizona. In Texas, Chevie admitted to his brother, Shane, that he participated in the Mueller family murders back in Arkansas, going into full details. A man was stopped in Washington in February and caught with a stolen firearm. The firearms was one of the items stolen from William Mueller. When law enforcement questioned the man, he said he bought the gun from a gun show in Seattle. After investigating further, it was found that Chevie Kehoe was the one who sold the weapon. This brought attention to the Kehoe family, and the police began to closely watch them. In April, there was a pipe bomb set off in front of Spokane City Hall. Later, it was traced back to Shane and Daniel Lee. Clearly, the criminal activities funding the Aryan People's Republic didn't slow down at all. The bodies of the Mueller family were located in April. A man fishing in the bayou in Russellville stumbled upon the bodies of Nancy, William, and Sarah. When they removed the bodies and inspected the bags and duct tape, there seemed to be tiny specks of auto body paint stuck on the duct tape that was around their necks. Meanwhile, Lovelace was a suspect in the murder of Jeremy Scott but was residing in an unknown remote location. So in August, the police decided to lure Lovelace into town from his heavily booby-trapped property. They used a fake story that a Mexican drug dealer was exploiting local girls. So Lovelace heavily armed himself and headed to town. Lovelace arrived in town and law enforcement immediately surrounded him and arrested him. The police took him in for questioning when he eventually agreed to take law enforcement to the body of Jeremy Scott. When the individuals involved in the Aryan People's Republic got word that Lovelace was arrested, they began to worry that the police were focusing in on their group. They headed to Montana where Gloria was living at the time. Another man was arrested armed with a gun that was stolen from William Mueller. In December, the man informed them that he purchased the gun from Chevie Kehoe. Chevie is then found and arrested. When Chevie learned of his father's arrest, he gathered the remaining items they stole from the Muellers and left for Ohio. In January 1997, Chevie and Shane end up in Ohio with their families. They decide to reside here for the time and all pay a month's rent in advance at a campground. The brothers were out on February 15th when they passed Trooper Harker, a 26-year patrol veteran. He said when he spotted the brothers in their 1977 Chevy Suburban, he was suspicious of the man driving. He said the way Chevy stared at him is what made him suspicious. He also noticed that they had one Washington license plate. He knew Washington required two. He decided to pull them over, radios in the license plate number, and proceeds to approach the vehicle. The dispatcher notifies the trooper that the license plate is expired, so he continues to approach the vehicle and turn on his lights. The trooper approaches the driver's side of the vehicle and asks for identification, and both men claim not to possess an ID. Shane told the trooper the Suburban belonged to their friend, and the trooper said he grew suspicious and asked Chevie to step out of the vehicle. Chevie complied and got out of the driver's side. He and the trooper were speaking for a few minutes when the trooper began to pat Chevie down. Chevie then grew angry and exclaimed that he didn't want to be violated. Clinton County Sheriff was driving by when he noticed the trooper and pulled off behind him and got out to assist. They both noticed Shane moving around in the vehicle and at one point couldn't see him. The trooper told Chevie he could either sit in the patrol car while he ran checks or he'd be arrested immediately. As the trooper and Chevie begin to walk back to the trooper's vehicle, Shane opens the passenger door and caught the trooper's attention, allowing Chevie to flee and run towards the vehicle. Shane jumped out and pulled a gun out of his jacket. Sheriff Gates saw him pull the gun out and they began shooting at each other. The first round, fired by Shane, went right between the two law enforcement agents. So many shots were being fired back and forth. Luckily, no one was hit. Later, the sheriff would find glass in his hair from the window of the car. While all of this is happening, Chevie jumps into the Suburban and takes off, leaving his brother to flee on foot. Shane takes off on foot, being followed in pursuit by the sheriff. The whole time this shootout is occurring, the dash cam on the trooper's car recorded the whole situation. The trooper runs to the police vehicle to chase Chevie, discovering it had a flat tire. Shane was able to get away from the sheriff, so they had a huge search, including officers from other jurisdictions and helicopters. Chevie ended up in an industrial parking lot while searching for Shane, but he was spotted by the police. They pulled into the parking lot behind the Suburban, and just as Officer Rick Woods got out of the cruiser, he saw Chevie jump out with an AR-15. He ducked just seconds before 12 to 15 rounds came through the door window of the cop cruiser. Chevie rolled under the Suburban and took off on foot. That night, the brothers slept in drainage ditches and fields. They always had a backup plan in case they get separated to meet at a truck stop in Casper, Wyoming. The brothers ended up at the truck stop where they planned to meet and took off together, stealing other vehicles. The police searched the Suburban and seized multiple loaded .45 caliber semi-automatic pistols with additional magazines loaded with ammo, FBI logo caps, black raid jackets with FBI logos, body armor, a leather wallet containing a U.S. Marshals badge, pepper spray, grenades, U.S. Marshals badge and belt holder, a loaded Glock with additional loaded magazines, bulletproof vests, hundreds and hundreds of ammo, random loaded magazines, and face paint. The dashcam video of the shootout was released, and now there was a nationwide manhunt for Chevie and Shane Kehoe.
Any guns, knives, clubs, stuff like that on here, sir?
I don't want you going and searching through all my stuff.
I'm not searching through your stuff, sir. I'm going to put you in my car.
Well, that's just fine, but
Now, do you have any guns, knives, clubs, or stuff like that on you? Very good.
Listen, sir, I don't want no problems.
I'm not going to give you any problems, sir.
Fuck him!
The brothers headed back to their families, who were all living under aliases, and the brothers found work on a ranch. Shane was beginning to notice things about Chevie that made him feel uneasy. First, Chevie spoke about killing their parents and seeing them as a threat. Then he would always talk about killing his wife, Karina, because he found out she was Native American. The last straw was when Chevie developed a very unhealthy interest in his sister-in-law, Shane's wife. Shane and his family decided to take off, leaving the others behind. Gloria Kehoe contacted the Spokane police and told them she was in fear for her life because she knew too much. She assisted the police in finding more of the Mueller's property that was in storage units rented by the Kehoe family members. Among the property, they also found a key to handcuffs. A key that fit in the handcuffs that William Mueller was wearing when he was murdered. Gloria told the officers that Chevie and Lee admitted to her that they killed the Mueller family before wiping out their home. Shane was still wanted when he ended up in their hometown in Washington State. He spoke with Christian Identity Minister Ray Barker, and he encouraged Shane to turn himself in. June 1997, Minister Barker accompanied Shane to the local authorities, where Shane turned himself in and made a deal with the police. He told them he would give them the location of his brother for less time for the shooting in Ohio. They compared the auto paint from the Suburban to the paint they found on the duct tape that was used in the Mueller's murder. The next day, the FBI agents headed to Gunlock, Utah with a map provided by Shane. Shane was very cooperative with law enforcement. The state asked for leniency for the crimes he committed. The judge decided to give Shane's wife the $60,000 reward money and Shane a 24-year sentence. On June 17, 1997, FBI agents tracked Chevie down, and as he was entering a local feed store, the agents surrounded him and placed him under arrest for the murders of William and Nancy Mueller and 8-year-old Sarah Powell. In March of 1998, Kirby is arrested in Washington, and agents seized hand grenades, machine guns, and ammo. Kirby was to remain in Montana because he faced charges of possessing one of the Mueller's handguns. Chevie was offered a plea arrangement with terms for the Ohio shootout. Chevie had to plead guilty to attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and carrying a concealed weapon, and in return they would drop 8 other charges. When the judge asked Chevie how he pled,
guilty to avoid the possible consequences of a trial by jury.
Kehoe was facing an 11-count indictment. In his plea bargain, he pleaded guilty for only 1 count of felonious assault, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of carrying a concealed weapon, all with a recommended sentence of 20 years, half what he could have faced. In this highly publicized shootout in Wilmington a year ago, you see Chevie's brother, Shane, shooting at a state trooper and a Clinton County deputy. Chevie gets away, but later shoots at a Wilmington police officer, wounding a passerby.
Weeks after his sentencing for the Ohio shootout, Chevie was turned over to the authorities in Arkansas for the triple homicide. Chevie Kehoe and Daniel Lee were being convicted for the murders of William and Nancy Mueller and Sarah Powell. They were facing racketeering charges. Racketeering, or RICO, which stands for Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization, is when an organized group runs illegal businesses known as rackets. The activities have devastating consequences. The government has created a system of laws designed to prosecute those involved. Kehoe and Lee were facing multiple charges, including conspiring to violate and violating the RICO statute with 3 counts of capital murder in aid of racketeering and robbery conspiracy in aid of racketeering. Chevie Kehoe was convicted in federal court and found guilty. He received 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Both Gloria and Shane served as the prosecutor's witnesses and testified against Chevie. The jury rejected the death penalty for Chevie, even though it was clear that he was the ringleader. The prosecutor presented evidence of Daniel Lee's participation in a crime when he was 17. A man was beaten, stripped, stabbed, and had his throat cut because he urinated on another man's recliner at a party, and Lee was involved. On May 13, 2002, the jury sentenced Daniel Lee to death. A radio documentary titled Convicting Chevie Kehoe aired in 2005. The documentary suggests that Chevie was being wrongfully convicted. In June of 2008, Chevie Kehoe's appeal was denied. He is now serving his time in Florence, Colorado. His brother Shane Kehoe was released on September 16, 2016. Shane served a total of 16 of his 24-year sentence. Daniel Lee asked the federal appeals to review his case for a new hearing. The federal appeals rejected his request. He then requested the United States Courts of Appeals to review his case for a retrial, but they also rejected his request. Daniel Lee is currently still on federal death row. Next episode of Strictly Homicide is our Big 1-0. For episode 10, we will start our cold case series. We will also be releasing mini episodes of Arkansas Mysteries for all patrons who pledge $5 or more. Strictly Homicide is researched, written, and hosted by me, Nicki T. If you've enjoyed this episode, please remember to tell a friend, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes. You can also help support the show financially by visiting our Patreon page. Just search Strictly Homicide or visit our website, strictlyhomicide.com. And on our website, you can find links for all our social media pages, our Patreon page, our merch store, and a place for one-time donations. If there is a case you would like us to discuss, or if you have any comments or corrections, send us an an email at strictlyhomicide@yahoo.com or find us on social media. Stick around to hear promos for some of my favorite podcasts: Whining About Crime, Murder and Such, and Dirty Bits podcasts. Until next time, y'all stay safe, especially you, Arkansas.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Lee of Whining About Crime, a story-driven true crime podcast created here in Canada. I try to examine the elements of a crime and how the motives, the victims, and sometimes even the accused stories can teach us something about ourselves and the people we encounter. Can we learn something that can be applied to our own lives? Well, there's only one way to know. You'll know that you found me when you hear me say, please, don't leave me.
My name is Hunter.
And I'm Haley, and we're your hosts of
Murder and Such, a podcast about true crime, serial killers, and other dark subject matter. Join us while we fill your ear holes with some crappy comedy and disgusting tales.
You can now find us on Spotify,
iTunes,
Stitcher,
Podbean,
and all of your podcatcher services. You can like us on Facebook, Instagram, and follow us on Twitter
at Murder and Such.
Hope to hear from you guys soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, I'm Tawny Plattis, and I host the Dirty Bits podcast, a show where I very casually retell the sexy, scandalous, and salacious stories your teacher probably left out. We premiere a new episode every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Visit us at tawnyvoice.com/dirtybits to learn more. See you next Tuesday.